I promise. Never let go.
Hey, what's up everyone, it's Ryan here from The Y, and today we're going to be taking a look at the all-time classic, Titanic. In terms of iconic films, it really doesn't get better than this. You've got DiCaprio and Winslet as the star-crossed lovers, James Cameron behind the camera, the backdrop of the Titanic disaster, and real stories from over 100 years ago, all amounting to it becoming the first film to cross $1 billion at the box office. On that note, let's get right into the video. Here are 30 facts you didn't know about Titanic. Apparently, the scene in which Rose thanks Jack for saving her life was basically all improvised. And yes, that even includes the part where they spit off the boat, as much of the dialogue was not in the script.
Really try and hawk it up and get some body to it, you know? You gotta...
Also, in the original version, Rose didn't spit in Cal's face at all, but rather pricked him with a hairpin. It was only after Kate Winslet suggested the latter that Cameron agreed it was more dramatic. As for how actor Billy Zane felt about it, he said that after a while, he'd been spit in the face so many times, he just sort of became numb to it. And to give you an idea of how many takes there were, her saliva dried out and she was forced to resort to lube. By all accounts, Titanic was not supposed to be a big success. And further than that, everyone, including James Cameron himself, expected it to be a massive flop. The major reason behind this was the enormous cost of making the film. The budget initially started at $100 million, but following costly delays and various mistakes, it ballooned to over $200 million. This made it the most expensive film of all time. And funny enough, after adjusting for inflation, the movie itself cost $50 million more than it took to build the actual Titanic. James Cameron lamented, "We labored the last 6 months on Titanic in the absolute knowledge that the studio would lose $100 million. It was a certainty." Luckily for Cameron, he couldn't have been more wrong, as the most expensive film of all time also became the highest grossing film of all time, at over $2 billion of revenue. Many of the shots in Titanic were faithful recreations of both photographs taken in 1912 and paintings done by Ken Marshall. The first couple of these shots were based on photos taken while the Titanic was still at port. Then there are many scenes in the film almost perfectly copied from the paintings of Ken Marshall. Marshall is a painter best known for his many historical portraits done on the Titanic, and he additionally served as a consultant on the 1997 film. Lastly, the scene with the boy and his spinning top was taken from a real photograph dated April 11, 1912. Jesuit priest Francis Brown was the photographer, and the image was preserved because he wasn't on board when the Titanic sank. After the ship left England, it had 2 initial stops before sailing across the Atlantic, in France and Ireland, where Brown departed. As for the little boy and his family, they luckily all survived the ordeal, with little Douglas Spedden not even waking up till the next morning, safe and sound on the lifeboat. But his good fortune was short-lived, as 3 years later, at the age of 9, Douglas was hit by a car and killed. If you had to guess what was the very first scene they filmed of Jack and Rose, you might think it was their first meeting, or maybe even the fancy dinner they both attended. Well, you might be surprised to find out that the first scene they shot together involved Kate Winslet getting naked so he could draw her.
Jack, I want you to draw me like one of your French girls, wearing only this.
This was obviously a bit awkward as the pair had barely gotten the chance to get to know each other. So in DiCaprio's own words, she wanted to break the ice a little beforehand. So she flashed me. I wasn't prepared for that, so she had a one-up on me. Among the most depressing scenes in Titanic is the old couple laying in bed together accepting their fate. They were based on Isidore and Ida Strauss, the co-owners of Macy's who perished aboard the ship. And a deleted scene provided more context on what happened with them that fateful night.
Please, Ida, get into the boat.
No! We've been together for 40 years. And where you go, I go.
In reality, it played out almost exactly like the deleted scene. Ida refused to leave her husband behind, and Isidore even declined an offer to get on a lifeboat as he felt being made an exception while women and children were still on board was totally unacceptable. Eyewitnesses reported Ida telling her husband, "As we have lived, so we will die together," before giving her maid her fur coat and insisting she get in a lifeboat. They were last seen hand in hand, sitting on deck chairs awaiting their fate. something Titanic did really well was its placement of historical figures into different parts of the film. One such figure was Chief Baker Charles Joanne, who's seen taking a swig from a liquor bottle and then later makes an appearance as the Titanic's going down. In real life, Joanne was in fact the chief baker, had a drop of liquor as the ship was going down, and is known for being the last survivor to leave the Titanic. After grabbing hold of the safety rails and riding the ship down like an elevator, he proceeded to tread water for over 2 hours before being saved by a lifeboat. According to Joanne, he amazingly wasn't even that cold, a phenomenon he attributes to consuming alcohol. In the production of many films, there comes a scene where it's crucial to get it filmed perfectly in one take. Whether it's an explosion, a fire, or maybe even some kind of a big car wreck, you're only going to get one opportunity as the set's going to be virtually ruined. For Titanic, that scene came in the form of water crashing down the grand staircase, and luckily they got it right on the first try. The filming of Titanic was home to one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard coming out of a movie set. The story begins on the night of August 8, 1996, with the crew breaking for dinner around midnight. Lobster chowder was one of the many options provided by the catering company, but for the more than 60 people who consumed the chowder, they quickly realized something was wrong with it. According to Bill Paxton, who played Brock, the treasure hunter, some people were laughing, some people were crying, some people were throwing up. Obviously, the next step was to go to the hospital, so the crew vans came and picked everyone up and shuttled them off to the hospital. Once there, Marilyn McAvoy, a member of the crew, described the chaos. Eventually, we all got put in these cubicles with the curtains around us, but no one wanted to stay in their cubicles. Some were in wheelchairs, flying down the hallways. James Cameron even said he got stabbed in the face with a pen and watched the director of photography march crew members down the hall in a highly vocal conga line. Come to find out later, PCP laced chowder was to blame. As for the culprit behind this disaster, the police opened an investigation that lasted 2.5 years, but were never able to solve the mystery. Now, I'm not saying that James Cameron or anyone else deserved to get spiked with PCP, but he sure didn't give a shit about hurting people's feelings on set. Dubbed the scariest man in Hollywood, James Cameron had no problem yelling at crew members for messing up, being stubborn to a fault, and doing things that some construed as potentially dangerous. My favorite thing to come out of all this is hearing that the crew had a name for Cameron's evil alter ego. They called him Midge, or Jim spelled backwards. However, in all fairness, there have been numerous reports that in his later years, Cameron's chilled out a bit and doesn't get as pissed. A fact which I'm sure future Avatar crews love to hear. While directors always have a large degree of control when it comes to their films, there is usually a distribution of responsibilities concerning different aspects of the movie. But with James Cameron, the man does it all, as he wrote Titanic's script, directed it, produced it, and even shared in the editing responsibilities. If that wasn't enough, Cameron additionally was the artist behind all of Jack's sketches. This means that during that one famous scene, the drawing hand wasn't DiCaprio's, but instead Cameron's.
It was the most erotic moment of my life.
As much as it'd be downright incredible if Jack and Rose were real people who actually rode on the Titanic, the sad truth is that they're fictional characters. Though, after the film came out in theaters, it was discovered that there was actually a Jay Dawson on board the Titanic when it sank. And while his name was Joseph and not Jack, Titanic fans decided it was close enough and turned his tombstone into somewhat of a celebrity site with a never-ending supply of flowers.
But now you know there was a man named Jack Dawson.
Unfortunately, Kate Winslet wasn't able to take home the iconic Heart of the Ocean necklace.
And they called it Le Coeur de la Mer. The
heart of the ocean.
Yes.
Though she did snag a pair of Rose's earrings as a memento, and ironically, Winslet said somewhere along the way she lost one of them, which does make you wonder a bit. To film the scenes of the ship docked at port, James Cameron built a replica of the Titanic up to 90% scale, but due to the absurd costs of such an undertaking, they decided to only assemble one side of the ship, and because of prevailing wind conditions, they were forced into making the starboard side. This turned out to be a problem as back in 1912, the Titanic docked on the port side. So to overcome this discrepancy, Cameron resolved to film everything as it was, and then flip it in post-production. This inevitable flipping of the image meant that everything, and I mean everything, had to be reversed. Text had to be written backwards, actors had to walk left instead of right, driving wheels had to be placed on the opposite side of the car, and even Kate Winslet's hat and buttons had to be placed on the other side of her body. Right as Jack is about to draw Rose, he says the following:
Overrun. The bed. The couch.
Hearing it back, the line just has a certain natural feel to it, thanks in part to him stumbling over his words. So it may not be a huge shocker that this wasn't the originally scripted line and was rather a mistake. The scripted line was simply, "Lie on that couch." However, James Cameron thought DiCaprio's mistake flowed better than what he actually wrote, so he decided to keep it in.
Overrun. The bed. The couch.
Excluding the present-day scenes, the movie lasts for 2 hours and 40 minutes, the exact amount of time that it took for the Titanic to sink. Additionally, the collision with the iceberg in real life was said to have lasted for 37 seconds, which the film perfectly replicated. And in the closing scene, the clock reads 2:20, which is significant because the Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m. Honestly, I think we have to consider the possibility that James Cameron might have OCD. New research points to a way the Titanic could have potentially been saved, and it wasn't simply by avoiding the iceberg. Instead, the science hypothesizes that if the ship were to have hit the iceberg head-on, chances are it would have been damaged, but not destroyed. The impact of a head-on collision would have definitely caused a couple watertight compartments to have flooded, but the Titanic was set up to stay afloat even with 4 compartments going under. The major problem with sideswiping the iceberg was that 5 compartments were instantly damaged beyond repair, dooming the ship to its fate.
She can stay afloat with the first 4 compartments breached, but not 5. Not 5.
To add to the sense of realism, James Cameron created backstories for over 150 of the extras on the set. One of those extras was supposed to be Ava Hart, a little girl who managed to escape in a lifeboat with her mother. And according to Ava's testimony, this scene was real in the sense that this was actually her father's last words to her.
You hold Mummy's hand and be a good little girl.
The car that Rose and Jack have sex in is a 1912 Renault Type CB Coupe de Vie. The scene was somewhat based in reality in that the car was the only automobile being transported on the Titanic, according to the manifest. And although the car was never found in the wreck, Cameron was able to create an exact replica based on documents that listed the vehicle specifications. One cool thing to note is that James Cameron showed in 2019 that even after over 20 years, the famous handprint is still there. During the part where the officers try to keep order in the chaos of the evacuation, things get pretty crazy, and the character Charles Lightoller says the following:
Get back, I say, or I'll shoot you all like dogs. Keep order here.
But here's the funny thing. The script only called for him to say, "Get back, keep order." Johnny Phillips supposedly got so caught up in the moment, he simply blurted out the line without thinking. So when Cameron ran over to congratulate Phillips and to tell him to do it again, Phillips was so out of it, he replied with, "What did I say?" If we take a look at the Titanic sailing in the open ocean, you can see that one of the smokestacks isn't actually emitting any smoke. This was done for the sake of historical accuracy, as one of the smokestacks on the real Titanic was mostly just there for aesthetics. It was additionally used to ventilate the first-class rooms and even as storage for extra deck chairs, which makes you wonder how many more lifeboats they could have stowed away in there.
Forgive me, but it seems that there are not enough for everyone aboard.
About half, actually.
For basically all his life, James Cameron has had an intense fascination with shipwrecks. And for him and many others, the Titanic's always been the Mount Everest of shipwrecks. Thus, when he saw the 1992 IMAX film Titanica, Cameron decided to acquire funding from Hollywood so he could do the same thing. He says it was, "Not because I particularly wanted to make the movie, I wanted to dive to the shipwreck. All in all, Cameron wound up chartering 12 dives to the Titanic in preparation for the movie. Though you could say, the trips were more of a personal undertaking, as much of the underwater footage they filmed was unusable due to many problems that arose from filming at such depths. One of the biggest questions surrounding Titanic has always been whether there was enough space on the door to fit both Rose and Jack. People argued that there was, that Rose was selfish, and so on. The question went largely unanswered till 2012, when an episode of Mythbusters tested this very myth and found out that yes, Jack should have been able to survive with Rose, especially if they utilized her life vest to give the door more buoyancy. But James Cameron wasn't having any of it and simply responded with, "I think you guys are missing the point. The script says Jack died. He has to die." Although he did concede a smaller door might have been more believable. Titanic is known for being pretty historically accurate, apart from a few changes made to dramatize events or to keep the focus on Rose and Jack. Although, one of the more confusing inaccuracies comes in this scene.
I remember when I was a kid, me and my father, we went ice fishing out on Lake Wissota.
In reality, this would have been impossible because of the fact that Lake Wissota was non-existent until 1917, as it was only created following completion of the Wissota Hydroelectric Dam. Even though this was clearly historically inaccurate, they quickly made up for the error by referencing a quote from a survivor.
"It hits you like 1,000 knives stabbing you all over your body."
This exact description of freezing water was recounted by Charles Lightoller in his memoir on the sinking of the Titanic. Though Kate Winslet didn't exactly hate filming Titanic, to say she had a pleasant experience would certainly be a lie. Among her recorded injuries was chipping a piece of bone off her elbow, getting countless bruises, coming down with the flu from staying in the cold water too long, and almost drowning twice. Her final take on everything was that she wouldn't work with Cameron again unless it was for a lot of money. I guess we figured out how Cameron got her to sign on for Avatar 2, and it looks like it may have come at the price of almost drowning a couple more times. The most expensive mistake in the filming of Titanic involved a 5-minute deleted sequence between Rose, Jack, and Lovejoy. The scene was set to take place after Cal makes the following remark.
"I put the coat on her!"
In the deleted clip, Cal doesn't just leave it at that, but rather hands the gun back to Lovejoy and tells him he can have the diamond if he can kill them. He tracks them to the dining hall, notices they must be in there because of the locked door, and then spends a couple minutes taunting the pair, trying to get them to come out. Eventually, Jack and Lovejoy get into a fight, which ends like this.
Compliments to the Chippewa Falls Dolls!
Cameron said that because of the massive amount of detail that went into the backdrop of the scene, every take was an hours-long affair. But when test audiences viewed the scene, it absolutely did not resonate. And logically, it makes sense. The whole thing just feels unnecessary because the ship is literally sinking while the standoff's taking place. And add on to this, the fact that people really didn't care about Lovejoy, it was simply a recipe for disaster.
I've been looking for you, miss.
Gloria Stewart, who played present-day Rose, was the only person on set who was actually alive during the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Stewart was 86 years old during the filming of the movie, and as a result, had to undergo 2 hours of makeup every day to make her look 100. And in line with the character she played, Gloria Stewart passed away in 2010 at the age of 100. Another depressing scene in Titanic features a mother putting her kids to bed for the final time. Besides the fact that the mother is Jeanette Goldstein or Private Vasquez from Aliens, the story she tells holds a deeper meaning than what you might guess.
And so they lived happily together for 300 years in the land of Tir na Nog.
That's because Tir na Nog, or the Land of Youth, is a city in Celtic folklore that can only be reached by going underwater or across the sea. When Jack and Rose make plans for the future, these are a couple of the things they talk about.
We'll ride on the roller coaster till we throw up. Then we'll ride horses on the beach, right in the surf.
Then, at the end of the movie, you can see that she did in fact go on a roller coaster and ride a horse like a man. Neil deGrasse Tyson is known for being a stickler when it comes to astronomy, so when he came across this scene in Titanic, he couldn't believe his eyes. As Tyson explained, the star field was not even close to what the real thing would have looked like at that specific latitude and longitude at that time of day in 1912. Like anyone would have noticed, but Tyson was so perturbed by this, he wrote what James Cameron called a snarky email to him, describing his displeasure with the science behind the night sky. And as a self-described perfectionist, Cameron couldn't ignore the mistake and changed it for the re-release in 2012. At the end of the film, Rose is shown to have been in possession of the heart of the ocean all along, and finally gives it back to the sea in an emotional scene. It's hard to believe, but we were almost screwed out of this heartfelt ending by an alternate take. The other version starts out the same way with Rose going to get closure, but this is where things go downhill, as Brock and Rose's granddaughters spot her and run over. Rose uses the necklace as a sort of hostage and tells them not to come any closer or else she'll drop it. She then spells out why she didn't sell it, how this is finally closure, basically all the things that are better left unsaid rather than explicitly stated. Then more people run over. They of course tell a couple bad jokes.
I don't know what to say to a woman who tries to jump off the Titanic when it's not sinking and then jumps back on when it is.
She lets him hold it for a second. Then...
Jesus, no! That really sucks, lady!
Yeah, thank Jesus they went with the other take, cause this scene would have been like a black hole sucking out all the magic from the rest of the film. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe for more content like this. Alright, till next time, have a great day everyone.